Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Clinton and Fab here with Team Haig. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about inspections and how that process works and some of the things there. Basically, how an inspection works is generally when you make an offer on a home or a condo or townhouse, you're going to have some conditions, subjects as we call them, in the offer, and you want to get some of them out of the way first. You know, your title, PDS, financing, stuff like that, because the inspection is one that's going to cost you, the buyer, money. So you want to get the rest of them settled up first and then do the inspection afterwards. How it works is generally your realtor or us will send you, a few people that work in the area that do a good job. Then you guys have a chat with them, reach out to them, pick which one you want to work with. From there, we book an appointment and we get it and do the inspection. How you can do that is a few different ways. So one is the inspector goes there on his own, does a whole inspection, then sends you a report later when he's done, and gives you a call, goes over it with you. Other option is inspector will go there, and then when there's half an hour, 45 minutes left in the inspection, you go there and meet them with your realtor as well. They'll kind of walk you through the house, show you what they found, if there was any deficiencies, where they are, what sort of their advice is to move forward, and then later on that day or the next day, generally within about 24 hours, you will get the report emailed to you. And that time you go over it with your realtor if you have any questions, and then you can move forward.
Yeah, so one of the videos we did, if you haven't seen it, you can go to our YouTube or our website and find it, is we did have a local inspector, Aaron Borsch from Core Properties, or Inspection, do a video with us to just tell people what's happening and how he's doing inspections and how it's all working now with the COVID, and answer questions generally about inspections. But that video led to some questions from some of our buyers and some of our sellers. That was, what happens when things are found, deficiencies, things that are wrong? How does that work? Buyers asking, do we renegotiate? Sellers asking the same question, but with a different tone, right? So do we renegotiate, but don't want to, right? And so what we found is that there's some things that come up pretty regularly, we find, in homes that, Tri-Cities, Burnaby, New West, Maple Ridge, the areas we work in predominantly, and I'm sure everywhere else also. We're finding similar things come up in the reports. And the answers seem to be the same all the time. So we feel that letting you guys know in advance to do an inspection on both sides can usually solve a problem and avoid this sort of conflict, because in the moment, there's a lot more emotion attached to negotiating, as you can probably understand. So one of the things we find is, we found rodent droppings in crawl spaces or in attics, right? Unfortunately, as much as this is gross, it's pretty common. My wife and I, even in our own personal home, we've had 2 times over the last 11 years where we've had problems and had to get, pest control, and, you find a new hole or a way they're getting in or so on. They get in such small holes, and the pest control people have told us that it's pretty much, I know it sounds bad, but, I think it's 75% of homes in the Tri-Cities, Burnaby area, have rodents, mice or rats, in the attic. Most of the time, they don't cause any problems. It's when they start to cause a problem that people notice or do something about it, or you see them coming into your home. So the solution has been, for us, is a lot of times it's an addendum, that says the seller agrees to have a pest control come in and do some sort of remedy and clean up, so that the new buyer doesn't have to deal with that right away, which seems to be pretty easy. So as a seller, you could say, I'll do that in advance, so I don't have to deal with it. As a buyer, again, not a big deal, because it's not really an expensive fix, if you want to call it a fix.
That's what I was going to say. Some buyers, they're like, yeah, I know, my house now has that too. So
yeah, there you go. Totally. Yeah. Another one that we find pretty common is bathroom fans venting directly into the attic. Now, that causes problems with even if you've got especially if you've got a new roof, it causes a problem because the moisture is obviously going into the attic and being trapped there. It should be vented out. So, again, for a buyer who's experienced and handy, it doesn't seem like a big deal. They're fine with it. But a lot of buyers are not and don't know what to do and feel that this is a big problem because of the information presented is the fact that, yeah, it's really bad for your attic, for your roof, for the sheathing, for lots of issues. But it's not an expensive repair, if it makes sense. So it's a serious problem with an inexpensive, generally, repair. So again, as a seller, you could get that done in advance, or as a buyer, you could say, I want that done prior to me moving in. But knowing that in advance would maybe prep you for are you really going to walk away from a deal if you've got an accepted offer and it's the home you love based on this? So maybe finding out what it's going to cost in advance might be a good way to look at it as a buyer. And as a seller, like I said, we would always recommend, if you could fix these minor things that come up, it alleviates it. And one of the last ones I'm going to talk about right now is gas fireplaces. Our inspectors that we find that we refer generally have detectors, and the detectors unfortunately don't say what type of gas is leaking, and they will notice a leak, and sometimes a very minor leak. And what you'll get from an inspector is just investigate further. So what that means to a buyer, hearing gas leak to a lot of buyers, for us, we find, is basically like saying the house is falling apart and I don't want to buy it, because it's scary. Anybody, I would be scared too, right? So again, usually in most cases, very minor repair, having a professional gas fitter come in and look at it, or a fireplace technician come in and look at it, doing a minor repair, an hour, 2 hours work, fixes the problem. So as a seller, maybe get those checked in advance, because you know what's going to come up. And there's rarely any buyers that are just willing to let it go and say, yeah, no problem. And it also raises the issue of, if your completion, you're not getting the keys as a buyer for another 2 months or 3 months. Does the seller want to live in a home that has potential gas leak? Probably not. So it does get resolved. But as a seller,
a lot of it's not even a harmful gas.
Yeah,
it's just,
there you go.
It's like, as you mentioned, the inspector just doesn't know what type of gas it is. So.
Yeah, fair enough. Exactly. So these are the things that, we as a team, knowing, with our experience, know that it's beneficial to let everybody know in advance, the buyers and the sellers, of things that do come up. And not that we're inspectors, and not that we want to be talking about all that every time, but there's a whole bunch of little things like that come up that are not detrimental to the home, but are general wear and tear of homes, or things that happen. Anybody who owns a home is going to have some sort of issues. So getting in front of it, I think, is a great tool to get things done quickly. And, because in the moment, there's a lot of emotion attached to the seller and the buyer putting the deal together. The seller might be moving out of town, or might have family, or might have already bought a house, and then now having to deal with this buyer who they feel is nickel and diming them. And the buyer saying, well, if it's nickel and diming, why are they being so difficult about it? Well, why don't they just get these things fixed? And, it's easier to discuss it in advance, I would say. What do you think, Clint?
Yeah, especially right now with the way the market's going and the activity we're getting on houses that are like more saleable, that people are interested in. Like, you want to be one of those houses. So if it's, it's definitely something you should consider. Obviously, it's your choice, but if it's something that is that easy to fix prior, and you want to be one of the houses right now that is getting multiple offers, just do it beforehand so that there's less problems that will arise, right? That's how I feel.
Yeah. And, I don't know. One of the things that I heard from an inspector a long time ago, I don't even think he's doing inspections anymore, but I thought it was a good piece of advice, is, he told one of the buyers that I was taking out, who he was doing an inspection for, he said, my report is basically to let you know what you're buying, not to tell you, because everything can be fixed. Doesn't matter what it is. So if you know what you're buying, then you know what the value is, right? So if you're buying a brand new house, of course you go through and you do a deficiency walkthrough, and everything needs to be perfect, right? But in an older home, you're always going to find things. So you can understand, possibly as a buyer, prior to being in that situation where there's no emotion attached to it, that a seller is going to react, well, what's the big deal? And on the other side, the sellers try to understand that the buyers are going to say, well, if it's not a big deal, just get it fixed, right? So, having everything done almost in advance as a seller, well, not everything, but as much as or you can, would be a great idea, to just have a smoother transaction, not having to go renegotiate. Because one of the worst things we find, I think, is that when trying to agree on price for certain things, like, for example, a lot of buyers who get deficiencies from a report, they don't want the seller to touch things. They want things fixed, but if it's not necessary that it needs to be fixed today, they'll ask for sometimes a dollar amount and want to renegotiate. But that's the tricky part. Where one guy says, it costs $10, another guy will say it costs $40. Well, that's a big difference when you're talking thousands, right? So that's the tricky part. So it's better to have everything sort of in advance, I would say.
Yeah, and one thing too that I think is helpful in these situations also, if it's, say it's something, a deficiency that came up that you weren't aware of prior to this, is just ask the seller and see if they have like a story as to why that happened, right? Like the other day I was doing an inspection and we only had access to the suite for the inspection because it was tenanted, so we didn't get to see it before they wrote the offer. And in the suite, there was a water stain on the ceiling, but it was completely dry. The inspector had his moisture meter there, touching it. It was a leak that seems to be not leaking anymore, right? And it wasn't that much water, just a little thin strip, right? And we asked the seller, or the seller's agent, we represent the buyer there, do you know where that came from or why that was there? And what we kind of thought was, because it was close to a bathroom up above, was that maybe the kid threw a toy down the toilet or something and flushed the toilet and it overflowed and they didn't know for a while, something like that. Turns out what happened was their son took a rubber glove, put it around the shower head, held it really tight, and the water backed up into the fixture and leaked down and there. And it was a one-time thing and it was over. So, I mean, that right there was enough for our buyers to go like, okay, that makes sense. It's completely dry. It's right below the bathroom. So if you can get answers, it's a lot easier for both parties to move on as well, because at least there's some information there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I hope that helped, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, guys.
We're going to be keeping doing videos like this about the different things involved in transactions in real estate. So if you have any questions, just reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah. Have a great day. Take care.